Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues and friends. Welcome to the seminar on biopesticide registration, organized by the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat that is hosted by the Plant Production and Protection Division at FAO. Today's webinar is organized under the Technical Assistance Program of the Convention, and it's a part of a broader series. Of course, this is the last one for the year. Of a series of webinars that aim to underscore the importance of promoting sound pesticide management, as well as the use of alternatives. So my name is Buyung Hadi. I'm an agricultural officer with the division, working on IPM issues, and I'll be your host for the seminar. A number of housekeeping rules before we start. For our participants, we cannot see you on the screen, but we really would love to know you. So please tell us your name, where you're from, in the chat box, so that we get the feel of who are you and where are we, all of us here coming from. The next point is we'll use the Q&A box for our question and answer. So if you look at the bottom of your screen there's a button that says Q&A. Please ask your questions at any time during the seminar. And do not use the chat box. So please use the Q&A box. That will help us also for the speakers to later answer your questions in writing, but also we'll be able to use that to have a bit of a moderated conversation by the end of all of the speeches. Finally, we do have interpretation into French and Spanish for this seminar that you can access using the interpretation button, also at the bottom of your screen. All right, so biopesticide is one of the next big things in agriculture, just like big data and gene editing, I suppose. The number of startups working on scaling biopesticide alone speak to this trend, so there is some excitement in the air and we can feel this. So today we are taking a deep dive into the regulatory aspects of biopesticide registrations. So regulation is in general a good thing. There is no reason to believe that all biopesticides are intrinsically safe. So it is good that we are looking into the key data for biopesticide registration. However, very often the registration system for biopesticides based on a system for chemical pesticides. Indeed, I've worked in countries where there is no differentiation between the two systems. So this is creating extra costs as well as technical difficulties for applicants, and eventually limit the actualization of the potential for biopesticides. So I'm glad that today we will have a number of speakers that will share with us various aspects, experiences, and tools for biopesticide registration and regulation. By this seminar, we hope to catalyze further conversations to develop an appropriate regulatory system in the different countries, of course, for biopesticide. Before we go to our speakers, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jingyuan Xia, the Director of Plant Production and Protection Division of FAO, to give his opening remark. Mr. Xia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill, and the distinguished guests and the participants. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. And Buyung already mentioned biopesticide a lot of big data, and the registration is very important. The Director of Plant Protection and Product Protection, I'm really very pleased to welcome all of you to this very important event on the challenge and opportunity related to registration of biopesticides. In my point of view, this webinar is not only an important topic, but also is very much in time. As you may know, starting from 2022, FAO will implement its strategic framework 2022 to 2031. In this framework, FAO is committed to achieving UN 2030 agenda through transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agro-food system for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life. In this context, plant production and protection division of FAO, or we call NSP, has a unique role play to enable transition to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable plant production, particularly protection, through optimization and minimization. Here, I want to say something about what is optimization and minimization. Optimization, this means we should take a system approach, optimize structure, functionality, and system and service of agro-cropping system to make a system functioning. At the same time, to minimize negative impact of agrochemical, of course, including pesticides. So this is very important. Try to understanding what is optimization and minimization. To do so, you know that, and biopesticides can play a key role for optimization function of the system, and also to minimizing the negative impact of agrochemical. So that's why I listen today, this seminar is not only important, it's really in time, because about 20 days later, we enter to 2022. It's time for us to implement new framework. So this event, organized by Rotterdam Convention Secretariat FAO, underscore the importance of facilitating information exchange regarding regulatory and management practice, to promote the safer use of pesticides and the development of use safer alternative and technique for control pest and regulate plant growth. And the recent year, maybe you know that FAOG launched global action on fall armyworm control, and we have also fall armyworm secretariat. In fact, the Boom also is coordinator for this secretariat. We always counter the problem. People ask, the biopesticide is good, but we need to enable environment. Yeah, with how to speed up for registration. So that's why I found this so important. It's a high time to deal with this issue. Nowadays, availability of thematic chemical pesticides has shown decline over the last 10 to 15 years because of stricter health and safe legislation, and also concerned about the effect of pesticide residues in food and the negative impact of this chemical on the environment. Everybody knows that. Also, at the same time, development of new less harmful pesticides has been slow, particularly due to a fear of discovery rate of new inactive, molecular, and partially towards increased cost of registration. So one time we need more biopesticides. Another time, another phase, we have some difficulties. So in this context, the search for alternative pesticides pest management tool and tactical, including biopesticides, have shown very high potential and have seen a significant increase in their use. In fact, the global biopesticides market is projected to grow by nearly 15% between 2020 to 2025. This morning, I remember we have full armyworm end-of-year meeting in Asia country, and all the country and the region mentioned now there is a promise missing for biocontrol, of course, including biopesticides. So the criteria traditionally used for evaluate chemical fertilizer are often not suitable for biopesticides. In view of the increasing important role of biopesticides, official and of regulatory authority play an essential role. Also they must have requires the knowledge to be able to understanding what parameter are the best to suit assessment of each type of biopesticides. Therefore, there is a need for standardized dataset that will warrant that regulatory process is rigorous, but also rational, thus ensuring safety and consistent of this novel pesticides, while at the same time not hindering their development. Today's webinar will focus on registration of our pesticides, bringing together various stakeholders from research, regulation, and the corporate sector. And I'm very happy that, and I can say the four presenters, they're from and the EU, very powerful the pesticides, and also OECD and the Netherlands. And then also we have somebody from International Biocontrol Manufacturer Association. So we have a global, regional, national, also from policy and the technology. I think this arrangement is perfect. I'm sure people are very high, for this expectation. And according to my knowledge, and over 200 people make a registration from over 80 countries and over 120 organizations. This singular, very strong interest in this topic. And also look for the wonderful speaker and address your most concerned, maybe want to learn. I'm looking forward to a very successful and fruitful webinar. And back to Buyong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shah, for setting the scene for this seminar, but also for describing the relevance and importance of biopesticides and the registrations in FAO's current and future work. All right, now without further ado, we'll go with our speakers. Our first speaker today is Mr. Eric Liégeois from DG Sante of the European Commission. He will describe for us how the EU fosters registration for biopesticides. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Buyong, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to all of you. So I'm very proud to address you today with some news from the European Union about how to achieve a more sustainable food system thanks to the biopesticides, and to stimulate them and make the regulation of this biopesticide more rational, as Mr. Director Xia was just reminding us. We need indeed to regulate those biopesticides, but probably with more rationality and reasons than we do for chemicals. And this is the purpose of my presentation today, to present to you this, and that's really an interesting opportunity. So I hope that you can see my slides. Buyong, can you confirm?
We cannot see it yet, Eric. It's coming up. Wait a minute. Unfortunately, we have not seen it. I'm wondering whether Rotterdam Convention colleagues can perhaps share it for you.
I hope so.
Mario
Yes.
or Javier, please.
Javier will do that in a minute, yes.
Okay. Sorry about this technical aspect. Anyway, so I can start already to say that I will share my presentation in 4 main chapters. What is the concept standing for biopesticide, actually, so that everyone can be on the same page, but also the particularity that we have in the EU to stimulate the use of biopesticide, and this is due to the a strategy that we called farm to fork strategy in order to transform this sustainable food system. The biopesticide in the EU are actually regulated by the pesticide regulation, the placing on the market of plant protection product regulation. But we obviously recognize that there are challenges with this current way to regulate. And I will explain this to you as well as the opportunity to amend this EU regulatory framework for microorganisms, in particular microorganism-based pesticides. With the concept of biopesticide, actually, by telling pesticides which are based on the living organism, bio is the Greek the word for life. Actually, biopesticide can mean biological pesticides, can mean naturally occurring biopesticide, can mean non-chemical alternative, can also mean living microorganism or living organism, and also naturally occurring non-chemical, non-synthetic chemicals. So biopesticide is something which is not fairly defined at EU level at least, but comprise several group of microorganisms and living organisms and naturally occurring substances as well. I don't know if someone has news about my my presentation. I continue like this. I'm
also waiting for Mario or Javier to share your presentation, I think.
Okay, normally my screen is shared. This is what I'm seeing on my
at the screen. Moment we see patches of your screen that are dark. But okay, if I see that Christine and Taher said that they can see the presentation, so perhaps
okay.
you can proceed.
Why are we favoring this biopesticide at EU level? Because the society in Europe is really increasingly demanding for this integrated pest management. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I was attending a similar webinar that you organize at FAO level, and this is really important to associate what you heard there about integrated pest management, IPM, with the strong demand that we have in Europe for more sustainable way to produce food. This is also the strong demand on organic farming, which explain why we need more biopesticide in the portfolio of the organic farmers. But in general, the need for alternative to chemicals, to synthetic and especially in the context of the convention, to substitute highly hazardous pesticide, what we call candidate for substitution in Europe, is there. So an increasing need to find alternative, as Mr. Director Xia was mentioning. So we have to address this in our portfolio, a group of microbials, a group of microorganisms, a group of semiochemicals, a group of botanicals, but also the beneficial insects and mites, the nematodes, and even the mechanical methods should not be forgotten. So all these low-risk tools and methods shall be optimized. And one of this is, of course, the reason why we address this is actually that we have an overall objective of the European Green Deal, which is a policy, overarching policy, which pilots climate minimization, climate change minimization, but also optimizing the way food are produced. And this is part of this European Green Deal where you find the strategy from farm to fork. And the strategy from farm to fork is actually where some very ambitious objectives have been set for the year 2030 in order to reduce by 50% the overall use and the risk of chemical pesticides. You feel immediately that by having this objective, we need to find something to replace. We recognize that chemical pesticides are still playing an important role, but we have this political objective to substitute them by 50% within a period of 8 to 10 years from now. And we also
Eric,
want, yes?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I see that some people in the chat says that they cannot see the slides properly. I've been talking to Javier and he's ready to share the screen for you. So if you can close your screen sharing.
Okay, I stop sharing.
Javier will now share the screen for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apologize for this.
No problem, that's my fault, probably. Okay, I see that. Javier?
Can you please make it a full screen, Javier?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So this is where you find indeed the ambitious objective of reduction of overall use and risk of chemical pesticides, and also in particular reducing the use of the most hazardous pesticides. So a bit in the sense of the Rotterdam Convention, substituting the highly hazardous pesticide is becoming a transversal objective in the EU. At the same time, we want to transform the farming practice and support more and more organic farming. So therefore, it explains the need for more biopesticide today. Javier, next slide, please. Actions to support this transformation, the shift towards more sustainable food system have been clearly identified, and this goes over support to farmers. Support to farmers mean actually a reform of the common agricultural policy. You know that this is an important tool to support a farmer to have more sustainability in their practice, and in particular, we wait for the common agricultural policy from the member states in their strategic plan to elaborate ways to cope with this objective of the farm to fork. We will review also the another directive, which is calling for training, calling for checking the machine, and calling for actually involving more and more integrated pest management in the practice at the farm level. This is the sustainable use of pesticide directive, and where the enhancement of IPM is also there, will also be strengthened in the revision. The revision is expected to be there in the first semester of 2022 as a proposal. We will, and this is in particular my task in the team, to revise the regulation regarding the placing on the market of plant protection product containing those biological active substances. I will present today a part of it, which is dedicated to the placing on the market of microorganism-based pesticide. And finally, we have also an action plan for support to organic farming, together with a revision of the list of substances that can be used by the organic farmers. I would like also to mention the action plan on integrated nutrient, because nutrient of plant may also, excessive use of them, in particular nitrogen, may also lead, as we know, to recourse to more pesticide. And so making the use of nutrient for crop nutrients more sustainable may also reduce not only the pollution from fertilizer, but also less use of pesticide is expected from that. Next one, please. The scope of the EU regulatory framework for the biopesticide actually is not well defined. So there is no official definition in our EU regulation on plant protection product about biopesticide. Nonetheless, next one, in the scope, you find actually the microorganism next. The microorganisms, including GMOs, actually, although we do not have genetically modified microorganisms for the moment on the market, which include living bacteria, fungi, virus, protozoa, and the door is open to any other microorganism. We have also the semiochemicals and the pheromones, in particular, a huge group of straight-chain lepidopteran pheromones. Next to that, we have also the botanicals, so meaning the plant extract, the algae extract, which are non-living. And finally, we have also the dead microorganisms, so the exoskeleton of yeast, for instance, are also covered by the regulation. What we don't have in the scope, next, is actually the macroorganism, so the beneficial insect, the mites, and the nematodes. And we do not also cover next actually the physical and mechanical method in the regulation on the placing on the market of plant protection product. I will tell you more about how we intend to cope with some of them, but today it's more, next one, it's more to focalize on microorganisms. And as you see in the chart on the left side, that more and more new active substances are proposed since '96 for the marketing for the placing on the market in the EU. It's an important signal. So more or less half and half of the new dossier that we receive for the placing on the market of substances are concerning biopesticide. And you see also this trend in the approval. We have about 130 and maybe more now active substances approved in the EU, which are belonging to this group of biopesticide I was just describing. Next one. Of course, it's not easy in the EU. Just as a reminder, we have two strain of activity. We approve the active substance at EU level, and we actually let the member states authorize a plant protection product containing those active substances by themselves. So EU level and member states level, both for respectively for active substance and plant protection product. Next one. However, we have also, including for the biopesticide, a relatively long process, which is actually organized by this regulation 1107 of 2009 for the active substance. When we review, there is a dossier prepared by a company, an application dossier. This application shall actually be organized according to data requirements that are defined in the legislation. This data requirement and the dossier are first evaluated by a rapporteur member states according to a uniform principle of evaluation. And then all this rapporteur member states dossier or conclusion are peer reviewed by the European Food Safety Authority. And finally, it leads to conclusion that the European Commission is taking in order to approve or non-approve the active substance. This is the regulatory framework. Attached to that, next one, attached to that you have the risk assessment, of course, which take a long process. And next to that, next one, you have also a regulatory institution that we call the Standing Committee. Next one, the application and actually the process is organized according to two other regulation, one on active substance and another one on the plant protection product. Next one. So you have next one. You have for regulating the biopesticide in Europe, serious challenge. The first one, next, would be to agree on each active substance among 27 member states. So this is the block of Europe is complex, is various. The expertise are not always at the same level, but actually we have to compromise all this opinion from 27 member states. And for a biopesticide, in particular for microorganisms, this is done at strain level. So each strain of a microorganism should be approved at EU level. Next one. The next challenge for the applicant would be, of course, to cope with this complexity. And very frequently, and you will hear probably from colleague Roma from IBMA, there is a long, very long necessary time to market for a new biopesticide. That's we recognize. It's improving. Probably it was about 5 to 7 years in the past. Now we try to keep normally the 3, 4, 5 years maximum for a new active substance. But that's a challenge, really. The next for the applicant is actually to prepare a dossier for risk assessment according to data requirement, according to approving rules, according to testing protocols, which are not matching the biopesticide. These are they have been elaborated for chemicals and not for biopesticides. So that's another challenge for applicants. For the authorities, the next one, the lacking experience. They have a lot of experience on assessing the risk of chemicals, but they are lacking expertise, they're lacking capacities even in terms when they have to assess the risk for microorganisms. The risks are not the same, and this lack of experience is really detrimental to the fast track of dossier concerning biopesticide. Next. The consequences are delays in handling dossier. Because of the lack of experience, there are sometimes hesitation in the decision making. We identified data gaps. Maybe they are not justified all the time. And there are also inconsistency in interpretation of the current regulatory framework. That's the challenge. On the next one, fortunately, there are opportunities, and we are there as a policymaker to solve these challenges, hopefully. And we need to adapt the regulatory framework to the particularities of biopesticide. Compared to chemicals, we need really to realize that a living organism is not behaving in the environment, is not having the same effect on non-target organisms, on human beings as a chemicals. There is, generally speaking, a selection of biopesticide from the environment. So they are coexisting with human beings. They are coexisting with non-target organisms. So we need to take this biological aspect, the ecological aspect into account. On the next, yeah, please. Therefore, we engage into a revision of the concerned regulation regarding microorganisms as a first priority. And so if you click 5 times, Javier, you will see the data requirement for the microbial active substance, the data requirement for the plant protection product containing microorganisms. Next. Next. The uniform principle for assessment of the microorganism, and next, the Annex 2 to the Regulation 1107, where specific approval criteria for microorganisms are also mentioned. All this will be subject to a revision, and actually this is what occupied us for a couple of months now, and this will be delivered early 2022. The next, and you can click. So there are also 2 Commission communication to help the manufacturer, the applicant, to choose the right test method and the right guidance document. So this is an opportunity now to seize in order to foster the placing on the market of those biopesticides. We need them, and so we need also to adapt our regulatory system to that. Next one. The principle of the revision.
Eric,
yes,
if you can wrap up
I know.
within 1 minute or
next one then. The opportunity really, and this is the overall principle that we have, is we shift from the nice to know data requirement to the need to know. We focus on, in particular, next, please, in the biological properties, which is driving a lot of data waiving properties for the human toxicology, the ecotoxicology, the fate and behavior, and the residue. Many things can be explained if we concentrate the risk assessment on the knowledge we have about biological properties. Next one. There are relevant aspects, of course, identity, ecology, mode of action, origin and occurrence in the environment, relationship with known pathogen, metabolite of concern, and eventually also antimicrobial resistance gene to be really focused on. Next one. Opportunity is actually also given to develop guidance document. This is what we have done with next. Risk assessment of metabolite, risk assessment of antimicrobial resistance. The authority are offered to follow training course for the risk assessment of microorganisms. And we have also authorities involved in a working group on biopesticide together with industry, where we discuss the issues that they are facing. Next one. There are also a system of pre-submission meeting where the company, the rapporteur member states, and the Food Safety Authority are meeting. And also what we will hear from Magda in a moment, the OECD took the initiative to adapt the testing methodology to the particular case of microorganisms. Next one, and I will finish by this, to say that today we are at 1 month's time before the adoption by the Commission of the proposal. This will be formally adopted by the European Parliament and the Council in the first quarter of 2022. And finally, I would like to say that you can always contact us, because we have actually also a lot of expertise thanks to the member states expert. We discuss a lot about this microorganism. The next plan or next step will be also to look at the other category of biopesticide microorganism and the plant extract. This is also in our under our radar. Thank you very much for your long attention, and sorry for this technical aspect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Also to navigate that bit of a glitch in the technical aspect really graciously. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Ms. Magdalene Sachana from OECD. She will share with us the available tools and exchange fora in OECD Biopesticide Program. Magda, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you very much. So it's a great pleasure to be here with you and share some of the experience and tools that we developed at the OECD. So I will start by providing some information about the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and then move to the dedicated work on biopesticides, or covering some challenges, tools that we developed, and concluding with some benefits from our work. So starting with the OECD and its global reach, as you can see, we are currently count 38 member countries covering the North America, most of the EU member states, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Colombia, and Costa Rica. But we don't operate in isolation. We have key partners, including Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, and South Africa. But what is the OECD? The OECD is a forum in which governments work together to coordinate and harmonize policies. So government members basically meet and discuss and share their experience on issues of mutual concerns, and they work together to respond to international problems. And they do that by adopting consensus-based decisions. So for one of the things that OECD is very well known is about its publications. We publish a lot, about 250 publications per year, and a number of tools and database, and I'll share some of these during my presentation that are relevant to biopesticides. So how does do pesticides fit in the OECD work? So one of the fields in which OECD is actively involved is the sustainability of agriculture. So it became clear since the beginning, back in 1992, that there is need for a dedicated program, a program on pesticides that aims to streamline the pesticide approval processes. Also, not long after that, a dedicated expert group on biopesticides was formed to address these additional challenges with the registration of biopesticides. This expert group on biopesticides, that is abbreviated EGPP, aims to help member countries to harmonize the methods and approaches used to assess biological pesticides and to approve the efficiency of control procedures. This group started by reviewing regulatory data requirements for biopesticides, and then they developed, as I'll mention in my next slides, formats that support efficient data management. The group organizes annual seminars and occasional workshops on science issues related to harmonization and work sharing. And finally, the group promotes communication and exchange of information among regulatory authorities. So let's see the challenges that governments and industry are facing in managing biopesticides, starting from one hand with industry that spends considerable time and resources to develop new biological pesticides. And I think we'll hear more from Roma later on. However, relatively few new biological pesticides are approved each year. As Eric mentioned earlier, there is an increasing trend, and these are very good news, and we hope to see some more coming approved very, very soon. Also, companies try to sell the same biopesticides in multiple markets. On the other hand, governments, as we've heard from the EU Commission, devote considerable time and resources to review and approve them, and need to respond to scientific challenges posed by some issues related mainly to the nature of biopesticides. So through our program, we help governments and industry address these challenges, and we did that by developing some common formats to facilitate the management and sharing of the data. And we continue to exchange, of course, technical and policy information to address existing but also emerging issues related to the safety of the biopesticides. So as regards to to the support of data management, OECD has developed and is considering updating a common format for industry submissions. These are the OECD dossiers, and also specific formats for government evaluation reports, the OECD monographs. So the aim was to provide structure to the evaluation of reports submitted and facilitate data sharing. Of course, these formats are flexible and still government can apply their own criteria when making decision. So the overall vision with this approach was to have one registration submission for all OECD member countries, but of course there were some technical difficulties during the implementation. But it's so very rewarding to see that these formats are still in use, and particularly developing countries use them, and we are hoping as countries, OECD member countries, progress with and change the data requirement, will be available to update, in particularly the crosswalk between the data requirements of key member countries, and improve and make this vision of having one registration submission possible one day. But transitioning now from the paper-based to more digital-based formats for submitting risk data that is used for risk assessment, I would like to draw to your attention to this database that we have, and this its development is led from the European Chemical Agency, but is overseen by an advisory group at the OECD level. This is the International a Uniform Chemical Information Database, or as it is abbreviated, Iuclid. And I mention it here, although it is chemical relevant. The EU very recently decided to use this tool to submit the biopesticides dossiers. But to do so, there is need to use specific templates. These are the OECD harmonized templates, or OHDs, that basically provide formats for reporting information that is used for the risk assessment. And as these were designed to be for chemicals, we are currently updating these OHDs to accommodate biopesticides reporting needs. So now moving to some challenges, some examples with challenges, and I will start with challenges related to evaluation of safety of biopesticides. Eric touched base on this, and we know that the majority of the harmonized tools, the test methods, or the standards that we use for evaluating biopesticides risk are based on chemical pesticides. However, we've heard that biopesticides are particular, and they have can be different. For example, the microorganisms, some microorganisms can produce their own chemicals, these secondary metabolites of concerns, or they can produce copies of themselves. So new methods may be needed to effectively evaluate the safety. And to this respect, the expert group on biopesticide is organizing a conference in May 2022 2022 to identify relevant test methods for microorganisms. The main outcome of this conference on innovating microbial pesticide testing is to have a roadmap that illustrates the number of test methods that have to be adapted to address the needs for testing microorganisms, or even to identify new test methods that can be applied. Furthermore, the expert group is publishing a lot. So here is the link to the publications that can be used to address barriers to biopesticides regulations. So there you can find a number of seminar reports with the recommendations that they came out. Also, working documents and guidance documents for information purposes. I've included two recent ones, one on secondary metabolites and the other on technical evaluation of microbial strains, but you can find more there. Moving to the next challenge that is related to the biopesticides producers. We know that many of the biopesticides producers are small to medium-sized enterprises and are faced with relatively high cost burden for regulation of products with a small market. For this specific challenge, the expert group on biopesticides develops consensus documents that deal with niche uses of highly specific biocontrol agents. So currently we have in the pipeline two consensus documents, one on bacteriophages and the other on baculoviruses, that will become available in 2022. And also the expert group, in collaboration with another expert group that we have on minor uses, has developed recommendations to enhance global joint reviews and consequently reduce the costs for market entry. This can be particularly impactful for manufacturers of biopesticides, and of course it allows collaboration with stakeholders that will help to develop a guidance for joint reviews, not only for minor uses, but also for biopesticides too. I'll close with this last challenge that has to do with the biopesticides efficacy trials. We know that efficacy of biopesticides can be highly variable, and not all biopesticides fit into typical efficacy testing protocols. I mean, pheromones, invertebrate biocontrol agents cannot really perform well to this existing efficacy testing protocols. So there is also need for improved application, precision, user knowledge, and label use instructions. And to this respect, the OECD Expert Group has organized a seminar recently in June 2021 to discuss the issue. And some of the recommendations are listed here. One is it's about incorporating additional flexibility in study design of efficacy trials for biopesticides. Also introducing QR codes in biopesticide labels and provide more information. And finally, provide like evaluate efficacy of biopesticides as part of integrated pest management programs rather than as standalone treatments. And with that, I would like to conclude that with the OECD work on biopesticides, we aim to streamline registration and reduce any related potential risk by improving testing. Also, we know that practices based on biopesticides continue to evolve, and we're expecting that more and new products will come into market. But these new products come with some new challenges in the evaluation of their safety. So the OECD aims to provide tools to addressing these challenges and enhance protection of humans and the environment, integrate green growth strategies, and facilitate cooperation and cost savings for both regulatory authorities and industry. And of course, if you need more information, you can visit our dedicated web page on non-biological pesticides. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. And just a very quick acknowledgement that this work wouldn't be possible without the commitment and contribution from our experts that are coming from the OECD member countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Magda. All right, well, a little bit of a housekeeping rule. I see that people have been asking questions, both in the chat box and in the Q&A. So please ask your questions in the Q&A, and you can ask it in English, in Spanish, and in French. And I also invite our speakers to start already answering some of the questions that are out there in the Q&A box. All right, well, our next speaker is Ms. Anne Steenberg from the Dutch Board of the Authorization of Plant Protection Products and Biocides. We shall hear from her a country-level experience on biopesticide registration. Anne, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, I had to find my unmute button, which moved away on the screen. Well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. In this next talk, I will share some of the experiences of the CTGB, which is the Dutch board for the authorization of plant protection products and biocides in the Netherlands on the registration of biopesticides. Let me see whether this still works. Yes. First of all, a couple of words on CTGB. CTGB is the competent authority for the Netherlands. And as we are part of the European Union, all the work we do in the regulation of pesticides is based on the EU regulatory framework. CTGB handles currently about 30% of the new active substance applications in the EU as a rapporteur member state. Which is a bit more than our fair share because we have less than 4% of the population of the EU. The majority of these new active substances are actually non-chemical. So they are microorganisms, for example, or plant extracts. And of course, we are very happy to get this many applications for biopesticides, but it also has a downside because even though we have been growing continuously the last couple of years, we still have to limit the intake of new dossiers. So from our point of view, biopesticides, well, our goal, of course, as a regulator is to assess the safety and the efficacy of these biopesticides before they get to the market. However, we would like to do this, of course, without impeding these biopesticides from getting to the market. And as Eric already mentioned, we really need these low-risk pesticides for the EU Farm to Fork strategy and also for the Dutch policy vision on plant protection. It is true that not all biopesticides are in fact low-risk active substances or low-risk products, but they are important candidates to be so. So in this talk, I will go through some of the challenges and the opportunities we encounter when dealing with biopesticides. And I will go through all these subjects in the next few slides. So the challenges, I think the main challenge when dealing with biopesticides is that they're just very complex, especially compared to synthetic pesticides. Then we have a regulatory framework that was, of course, made for these synthetic pesticides and not explicitly for biopesticides. And then there is the chemical mindset. So people keep approaching these biopesticides as if they are synthetic pesticides. However, there are also very many opportunities. So of course, updating of the regulatory framework, Eric has already been mentioning this, using experience in other frameworks, and also sharing of knowledge, as Magda also talked about. So training of assessors, training of applicants, and also guidance development to ensure that we all treat these biopesticides in the same way. And then we see some additional opportunity to increase the efficiency of assessing these pesticides by grouping of substances, of botanicals, or for example, microbial active substances. So to start with, this inherent complexity, what is this about? Well, if you think about a synthetic pesticide, if we get a dossier for a synthetic pesticide, then it says, well, it's for this substance, and you perform also an assessment for this substance. There might be some metabolites, there might be some impurities, for example, but mainly it's about this single substance. If you now look at, for example, a dossier for a botanical active substance, then this botanical active substance may consist of very many components in the active substance. And you might start wondering immediately, well, okay, but which of these substances is actually relevant for the risk assessment? You don't know by looking at this chromatograph, which is important. And this situation is even more complex for microorganisms. Well, to start with, the hazards that apply to microorganisms are just more diverse than the hazards for chemical synthetic pesticides. So of course, for a microorganism, they might be pathogenic, they might be infective. And also a very big and obvious difference is, of course, that they might replicate themselves. To make it even more complex, all microorganisms, all bacteria, all fungi produce very many compounds just as part of their normal metabolism. And they produce, for example, these secondary metabolites, which can be really very many for each microbial active substance. And then if you think about a normal risk assessment for a chemical, where you compare the effects of a chemical to its exposure, well, if you think about the exposure to these metabolites, for example, and you think that microorganisms may grow after application and they might produce all these compounds, then you don't have a quantitative upper limit to the exposure of these secondary metabolites. So as we all know that a risk consists of the hazards times its exposure, and you don't have this upper limit, everything might turn out to be a problem. I mean, even water will be toxic if there is just enough. So you need to have a different approach than your normal chemical approach. Otherwise, well, you will never manage to perform a risk assessment. And of course, these microorganisms cannot produce these substances unlimited, because they are also limited, but they are limited by biology. So first of all, if we look at the regulatory framework for synthetic pesticides, which is for the substances for which our framework was developed, this framework is based on the hazards that were observed for these compounds. So for example, persistence, if you produce a synthetic pesticide, you really need to ask yourself, will this substance be degraded by microorganisms which occur naturally? And of course, toxicity is also a hazard. But this framework was not developed for naturally occurring substances, such as plant extract and microorganisms. So for example, if you think about a plant extract, would it be really relevant to know about the degradation pathway of this plant extract? Because it is produced naturally and it is already degraded naturally. So yeah, you can ask yourself why this is relevant for the risk assessment. Similarly, for microorganisms, for example, persistence for microorganisms is a bit of a weird notion because, of course, microorganisms have been around for a long time and they can also grow, and single spores can be really persistent, but is this relevant for the risk assessment? So what you might then do if you are stuck with this framework is try for an alternative approach within this framework. Be flexible or be pragmatic and try to fit them into this framework for synthetic pesticides. However, no matter how flexible you are, you keep running into the chemical mindset, the chemical approach to the risk assessment, which is continuously triggered by these data requirements, which are relevant for synthetic pesticides. So if you would use the conventional approach to these substances, for example, you might be asking information on all of these components in the botanical, or for all of these metabolites in your microbial active substance, or which it can produce. But what you would be doing, in fact, is asking for a lot of active substance dossiers for a single active substance. Well, obviously, this would not be feasible. It would not be feasible financially. It would not be feasible time-wise. And very often, it's also really not possible to do so. For example, you cannot get hold of sufficient quantities of some of these metabolites to be able to perform testing. So this obviously is not the way to go. Because, well, you are applying this chemical mindset to biology. So if you use more of a biology mindset to these biopesticides, and you think about, for example, this problem of these secondary metabolites produced by microorganisms. Well, of course, the challenges are that there are huge numbers of metabolites. A single strain can produce tens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of different metabolites. Some of them you would know about in your risk assessment, but some of them you would not know about because they have not been discovered yet. What makes it even more difficult is that they do not produce these metabolites all at the same time. And so there's also not a single method by which you can culture your microorganism and get all these metabolites in a test tube so that you're able to perform testing. But then if you think about biology and you think about our world, our Earth, we are living really in a microbial world. If you go out and you're sampling an agricultural soil, then in every gram of soil, so it's less than a spoonful of soil, there will be 1 billion bacteria and 1 million of fungal cells already there. And those that are active are producing metabolites, tens, hundreds, thousands of metabolites. So it's just normal biology. If you then think about food safety, for example, in the EU, we have maximum levels for contaminants for 6 groups of microbial metabolites. Compare that to the billion of bacterial cells in every spoonful of soil. And these are mycotoxins that we're worried about, so produced by plant pathogens. So a chemical assessment applied it to a biopesticide is really not appropriate, and it's also not needed. Because these substances already occur naturally, we have already a lot of knowledge on them from public literature, for example, scientific literature. And also very many of the substances we see as CTGP have already a history of use. So for example, if you would know that this plant extract is actually coffee, well, this would allow you to use a different approach than when you know nothing about this substance. And similarly, if you would know that this microorganism at species level occurs already in every agricultural soil, and that this specific strain is being used as a feed additive to poultry, then of course you might also have a different mindset going into this risk assessment. So what are the opportunities? Well, the opportunities are really updating the framework to make it fit for these biopesticides. An example that is already in place in the EU is the guidance for the evaluation of their efficacy, because many times the efficacy of these biopesticides is lower than synthetic pesticides, which is okay because you use it in an IPM strategy, but you need a different way of evaluating their efficacy. And of course, also a revision for the EU, at least, of the regulatory framework, really based on biology, as we're doing at the moment for microorganisms. And then you have these conditional requirements. So you only ask the information for a specific biopesticide that you really need to know to be able to assess its safety. And then, of course, it would be really helpful to have guidance on when you need which information for which biopesticide. Also, one of the opportunities is to use the information which is already there in other frameworks, because microorganisms and plant extracts do not only enter the food chain, of course, as when they're being used as pesticide. Because, well, microorganisms can be food. If you think of yeast or fermented foods, for example, they can be used as food or feed additives. They can be used as biostimulants. So we can use this knowledge, which is present already in other frameworks, to update the framework for biopesticides. And then there's one opportunity to increase the efficiency, because biological substances can really be grouped based on their properties. For example, certain kinds of plant extracts or components of these plant extracts, and also microorganisms. And for microorganisms, it's very obvious because you have the taxonomy already in place. And of course, you need to assess these microorganisms at strain level. But a lot of the information to be able to perform this assessment at strain level can be used from the species level. So it's really a waste of time and resources to do this evaluation every time for each strain, again, to evaluate the information at species level. So it would be very nice to have species level guidance to pinpoint which information is not needed at strain level. In this way, you would have the same level of protection as you would have otherwise, but far more efficient. So to conclude, well, of course, the safety of biopesticides should be assessed because they're not inherently safe. However, this should really be done using a specialized assessment framework and using a biological mindset. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. All right, before we move to the next speakers, I'd like to comment on one question that I see both in the chat box as well as in the Q&A box, which is the presentation of all the speakers. All of the presentations will later on be available in Rotterdam Convention's website. I will type in the link to the website in the chat box momentarily. All right, well, our next speaker, last but certainly not least, is Ms. Roma Quinn from the International Biocontrol Manufacturer Association. I'm glad that indeed Roma has agreed to give her talk at this forum, as she will hopefully be able to provide us the view from the other side of the table, i.e. from the biopesticide industry themselves. So Roma, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, it's interesting listening to the other speakers, and much of what I was going to say has been covered to some extent by other speakers. So just thinking a little bit about these technologies, I just wanted to sort of remind ourselves that, you know, we developed agriculture, which was feeding the world. We needed to do something urgently, but at some point we reached where the balance seems to have changed between sort of using these products to produce more food, better price, better quality, to a point where we seem to have changed the landscape. We seem to have changed what we're doing at agriculture to an extent where we didn't feel there was a benefit. And we're in that place now where there's a transition to change and saying we don't accept as much harm, and we want to think about what technologies we have. But we're still faced with the problem that we're working with monocultures, and monocultures are inherently unstable ecosystems. And that makes it very difficult, and that makes it very complex. And so we're always battling as biologists against this particular attribute. And that's where integrated pest management comes in. The idea is you look after the soils, you look after what the varieties you're growing, you're looking and watching closely for what pests and diseases arrive. You're thinking, can I have some physical interventions? Can I cover the crop? Can I do things to prevent the pests and diseases? Then we come in and say, okay, we haven't been successful, we need biocontrol. And then finally, if this doesn't work, we have chemical interventions. But this isn't a new idea. This is a concept that FAO developed in the 1950s, but we're seeing much more prevalence and much more integration of this practice. But that brings us to the biocontrol technologies, and what are we talking about? So generally we're talking about 4 groups of substances, which are the beneficial insects or macroorganisms, microbials, natural substances, or senior chemicals. When we think about how these technologies have been used, the first work that was done to developing the biocontrol agents was developing them as a substitute chemistry, really, where you had your pest and you had your product and you put one against the other and you had a dead insect, hopefully. And that's what we tried to do. But as we're developing, we're realizing actually this is very simplistic. And these biocontrol technologies have multiple modes of action. And when you're working with them, this is when it becomes complex, and this is why regulation needs to have a different concept. Is you're not just killing your target, you might be manipulating the behavior of the target, so you're not actually having a direct effect. Or you might be stimulating plant defense mechanisms, or you might be having all of these modes of action at any one time. And if we take the example of the lacewings, we now know that wheat produces a pheromone, and that pheromone attracts the lacewings to come and kill the aphids. So we no longer have this binary relationship, we have this tertiary quaternary relationship, and we're working with technologies which have this complexity of the modes of action, and this affects how you can regulate them. And then also we're working in an ecosystem, an agro-ecosystem, which is monocultures. It's still a very complex ecosystem. You've got the plant and you've got all sorts of microorganisms in the soil and on the plant having an effect and interaction. You're having the herbivores that are feeding on the plant having an interaction. And all these things are working together. And then you try and put in some of these biocontrol agents. So you've got very complex biology. Then you're working with substances which in themselves have complex biology, and you're trying to put both of these elements together. And then we're trying to say, well, how do we regulate both these elements? And that's what makes it really difficult to do this. And if we think about this more sort of directly, if we think about microorganisms, you've not just got the microorganisms, but you've got how you produce the microorganisms. So the microorganisms can be produced in liquid or solid fermentation, or actually in the host insect. And depending how you produce your microorganism can change what your active substance is. And as Anna just explained, you could have not just the microorganism, but you could have the compounds it produces, but you could have all the media which it was grown in, and all of these elements all together in your active substance. And same with botanicals, you can have a very, very simple plant extract where you've, say, taken the plant, you've steeped it overnight in water, you've extracted it off, and then you're trying to use that extract. But you can have something that's highly refined. So the complexity of what these substances are is really vast and unending. And it's so hard when you're thinking about regulation not to always have a case-by-case basis, that you're trying to say, can we start to put some general principles in how we regulate these substances? And the same with natural substances. It's such a wide range of substances. And then we think about senior chemicals. They're used in very small amounts, but they're not intended to have a direct kill action. What they're doing is changing the behavior of the insect. So, for example, it's mating disruption. So because of the mode of action, because of the environment these substances are going into, because of how these are produced, we end up with a real high degree of complexity. And we're sort of saying, okay, but how do we regulate them? So whilst I'm talking about regulation here, I'm primarily talking about microbials, botanicals, and senior chemicals, but that's not to say we're forgetting about the macroorganisms. So when we talk about regulation, we tend to think about registration of a pesticide or plant protection product, but from all of these biocontrol technologies, and sitting in front of that, we actually have to pay attention to access and benefit sharing and the Nagoya Protocol, that there's a fair and equitable sharing of benefit. And we need to think about that as when you take a product into a country to get it registered. And in some countries, you also have to think in advance of the pesticide registration process that you might have import and export rules to pay attention to. And then you get into the registration process. And mostly the registration process is designed for conventional chemicals, as people explained. And in some places we can see there's provisions for microorganisms, senior chemicals, natural substances, botanicals, but not always. And then more or less macroorganisms and entomopathogenic nematodes exempt from registration, but that's not true in every country. Some countries they are regulated, other countries they're not regulated. So then we would just think about this and think, okay, so what does the world look like? So I've just pulled out some examples of how long it takes to take a biological product through, and just to pause and think about why we might have some of these differences. So if we look at the United States, Brazil and China, it's taking around about 2 years for biocontrol products to get through registration. And thinking, well, why is that? Actually, in those countries, they have had a specific and adapted regulation for biopesticides for quite a number of years. So an example of the United States, around about 30 years ago, they developed what they know as the biopesticide scheme, and they developed a team of experts who just deal with biopesticides. They defined what they considered as biopesticides, and what we can see has happened is you have a faster regulatory process, but you also that allows more products to come into the marketplace, and so you see a high number of products available. But I also think about an example in Kenya. So in Kenya, in around about 2003, there was a real demand for having integrated pest management and for having biocontrol products. But there was no provisions for this in Kenya. So it's a really nice example where the research community, the industrial community in horticulture, the politicians all came together and said, okay, let's make a regulation that is for biopesticide. So they developed this in a very short space of time. It actually took about a weekend, and within 6 months they implemented a new regulation into law, and the net result of that is now that Kenya has a lot of biocontrol products available because they chose to take this action, but it required all those layers of stakeholders to become involved to facilitate this process and to make it go faster. So what we can see there is an example where if there's a need, a desire to have faster regulation, by having this specialist regulation of people who understand the technologies, it can help to facilitate the innovation, bring technologies forward. So the previous speaker, Magda, spoke about what OECD is doing for biopesticides, but FAO is also involved in this, and they developed their guidelines for microorganisms, botanicals and semiochemicals back in 2016, which is available to help countries to understand these technologies and say, well, how could these be regulated? How could we make the adaptations in our countries? Magda explained very nicely what OECD is doing. Eric and Anne explained a lot about what's happening in Europe. So there's some really lovely examples now of how you can adapt the regulation for these technologies. And it's not about chemistry, it's about thinking about this as biologists. And EPO, which is the European Plant Protection Organization, is also saying, from an efficacy point of view, these are different. You can't work with them and test their efficacy following the same guidelines and systems that you have for chemistry. You need to adapt. So we have these regulations changing with these transnational organizations, but then we have some lovely examples on sort of national or on regional level where you've got sort of harmonization. So in the US, where you have the biopesticide scheme, they have a reciprocity arrangement with Canada to make the regulation between the two countries move faster. And we see in the SILS countries in West Africa, they also have a biopesticide scheme. They also then have a good harmonization, reciprocity of data to share data and acceptance of mutual approvals, which again makes it a faster process. It makes more products available. It's less hindrance to the innovation. And I explained what in Kenya had adapted and developed a biopesticide specific regulation, and what they're doing through the Fall Armyworm project is moving that out from Kenya into the East African community to engender a harmonized approach and have automatic reciprocity of approvals and registration data, and the ASEAN countries are doing the same. And so we can see with these actions, what happens is you get more products available. So what does this mean for biocontrol technology and innovation? So if we look at microbials as strains, we more or less see that there's provisions for these types of substances to be regulated now. We can see that there's some consideration specific to microbial metabolites, and most systems are developing that are reasonable, but still there's a problem with mixtures and how you deal with these mixtures and how does regulation adapt. But what we can see coming is that the idea that microorganisms are used, what I call biofactories, where the microorganisms used to produce complex substances. And we haven't started to see much adaptation for regulation for these. And for microbials that are not wild type, again, we're just beginning to see some regulatory consideration for them. And botanicals, as explained, you know, they're complex mixtures. They don't fit well in many of the regulatory systems. And then if you synthesize them, where does those fit? And semiochemicals, well, we have all the work for short chain lepidopteran pheromones for mating disruptions. But as we bring more semiochemicals forward, which may have tritrophic interactions, what does the regulatory system do for those? So my call in a way is we need to really quickly adapt to these biocontrol technologies now, because what's coming next is even more complex. So we actually need to move really fast, and we need to make sure that the regulatory system is not inhibiting the innovation, because from an industrial point of view, this is one of the biggest problems we've got, is people have got great ideas, but they can't bring them into the marketplace. They're getting stuck in the regulatory system. But we also recognise that's because these are really complex. We're asking questions that haven't been asked before, and it makes it difficult. So sort of sitting and thinking about what's been happening around the world and what we're working on around the world. What makes a successful biocontrol technology? What gives us that capacity? What works well? So I think when you see that you've got a dedicated biocontrol technology scheme, then you start to see more products coming forward. We've got the example of Kenya, seen that happen in China, we're seeing that happen in the USA as well. That works really well. And then you have experts who understand the technologies, who are thinking more as biologists rather than chemists, and thinking this is a complex series of interactions, and how do we manage this, and how do we understand where the risks sit for these technologies. And I think it helps all parties if there's a really clear process from the beginning through to the end. So everybody knows what they're doing, what that's expected of them to do, and how to get there. And also maybe starting to think about the principles of that you only need data. You don't need data except in the following circumstances. And Eric explained a little bit of that in the European system, where it moves from what's good to know, what you absolutely need to know. And the FAO guidelines for microbials, botanicals, semiochemicals also has a discussion on this, and says for sort of microorganisms, what you perhaps can do, that certain types of microorganisms, you can have actually a very simplified series of questions to make this go as fast as possible, and thinking, what do we really need to know to ensure the safety of humans and environment for this technology? I think it's really important to have trusted and engaged partnerships, that there's trust between the applicants, between the regulators, between country regulators as well, so that you can have this reciprocity of data. And when that happens, you can see this working well. And then harmonization, have the same data requirements. So everybody's asking the same questions. It makes it much easier for applicants. It makes it easier for evaluators. And automatic reciprocity of data. You accept each other's opinions, and that comes from trust. And from a government level, if they have a policy to enable innovation, this also facilitates the system as well. So for me, to understand biocontrol technology, really, it's about thinking of this as biology and engaging. It's complex. We know it's complex, but when regulators start to engage with that complexity, then we can start to see technology getting better and moving forward. And yes, it's still also about chemistry. Thank you for inviting me to talk, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Roma. All right, well, thank you for all of our speakers today, not only for their comprehensive speeches and talks, but also I've been monitoring the Q&A box, and it's so fun to see all the questions coming in all different languages, and our speakers quickly trying to answer those. We've answered 27 questions, a few questions that are left out there. We're supposed to close at 5:30, but I think I would like to propose that we extend our time together for about 10 minutes, so that we can have at least one question that we can discuss from all angles here. And I'll pick the question that are asked by our colleague from Cambodia here, and that is about data requirements. And because indeed, I think this is one of the challenges, especially in the developing countries, for example, in which it's very challenging, both from the regulatory side, but also from the applicant side, to get required data. So I suppose, as everybody already mentioned, points about data reciprocity, points about harmonization can be reiterated here to mitigate that problem about a dearth of data in particular country. So I would like to ask the question, so what are the challenges for harmonization of and reciprocity of data, and how can we break those bottlenecks if we can indeed? So I'll start, and I'll give floor to all of our speakers today, but I'll start with Eric again. Eric, your thoughts, please, on data harmonization and reciprocity of data.
Well, I don't want to compare with the situation we are facing in the EU, but harmonization of the data required by the 27 member states was the purpose of having a regulation on the placing on the market of pesticides, including of biopesticide. And this is indeed a challenge I understand perfectly at global level. OECD might perfectly help in this, and they have a program also of twinning or co-creation of the risk assessment report, if you wish, that we observe with a lot of interest, because it's exactly the difficulty we are facing. Not only to require the same data, but to give the same value to the data which is proposed by the company. And the interpretation is indeed important for having a common understanding that there is obviously, in general, overall, no risk or low risk associated with the use of biopesticide. Not all of them, and I would summarize in 3 important aspects to keep in mind for the biopesticide: the pathogenicity to human beings and mammals, the production of metabolite, as Anne has explained extensively, and this aspect of antimicrobial resistance. As a company, if you keep focusing on this, I think that you have done already a long journey to succeed in approving the biopesticide, and in particular the microorganism in this particular aspect. I think this is important to keep in mind, the essential, and this is why we also try to focus more and more about the ecology and the biology of this microorganism in the first place, because it explains a lot of their properties, intrinsic properties, and help to support the risk. But the data required is difficult to draft a law rule about that, which cover all the situation. And microorganisms, because they are living organisms, they are very different in their mode of action, in their function, in their behavior, in their survivability. And this is important to concentrate first and foremost on the data which are available in the scientific literature, for instance, describing this biology, describing this ecological aspect. And from there, build up the reasoning for a reasonable, a rational, as the director said in the beginning, a rational but reasonable risk assessment.
Right. Well, thank you. I mean, the whole thing about the nice to know to need to know, and defining what is really needed to know is for me, I think, the take-home message. Magda, would you like to add to that?
Yes, sure. Yeah, as I mentioned in my presentation, originally that was the vision, how to have one dossier that can be submitted to many OECD member countries, and harmonization, as I've indicated, is a kind of keyword in what we're doing. But of course, we have to recognize that in the beginning, when we developed this guidance document and these dossiers, there was no much experience in assessing, evaluating biopesticides, and that's why we see that countries, and with first we have the EU updating the data requirements, and I think Canada is also did the same, and there are some other countries that will follow. So we hope that as you know, all these regulatory background changes for biopesticides will be able to update this crosswalk of data requirements. Or another opportunity that we have is to see if you know, use the global joint reviews approach and see what we can achieve through there. But there are difficulties. I mean, no, it's not easy even for the registrants to endeavor to this journey because they don't know what is going to be the outcome of this kind of global joint review. But for sure, it will be something that we need to do, and there will be lessons learned, and that will obviously inform potentially, you know, like co-submission for multiple countries.
Right. And later we'll hear also from Roma, I suppose. How does it look like from the applicant's point of view? But before that, I'd like to go to Anne. And Eric mentioned about, you know, it's difficult to draft a law that take into account all of the countries', you know, biophysical conditions, ecology, and whatnot. What's your thought from the national point of view about a harmonization system? I see also in the Q&A somebody mentioned that, right, data collected in Europe may not be too relevant to, for example, a condition in the tropics. so which again underline that, okay, each country, depending on where they are, may indeed have a specific requirements. But thoughts on that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think harmonization, well, it's a very good goal to try to harmonize, but you always will have specific indeed resulting from where it is used, but also, for example, for microorganisms, it's very important how the microorganism is produced. So you can have the same strain being produced in Europe, or in one country and produced in another country, but then still you would have to check whether the production process is sound. So even though it would be the same active substance, then there will always be things to check at product level or at strain level, for example. But I think, yeah, the best way for harmonization is to start having discussions or more discussions on how we should do this. What is really the need to know for these biopesticides, and agree on which data requirements are need to know for which microorganisms or which plant extracts or other biopesticides. Yeah, of course, guidances are very useful for this. Also, to have the discussion first and then to draft the guidance, it both helps to harmonize the approach. But indeed, I agree, you can never fully harmonize. There are also always some details you will have to check at national level or regional level. Yeah.
All right. Roma, for the final thoughts, from the applicant's point of view, how does this look like about data reciprocity, which you also mentioned in your presentation? You're on mute, Roma.
Thank you. Yeah, this is different. So the experience as an applicant is you repeatedly presenting the information in different formats, different questions all the time, and it's you're sort of thinking most of this is the same. And I think this comes down to trust, and I touched on that and saying, so how do you build trust? Trust, I think, actually comes from knowledge, and that if there's a better understanding and knowledge of these technologies, because I know when I'm working around the world that I think it's around about 80% of the regulators have 2 or less people working for them. So there's no ways you can build knowledge in all of those regulators. So how do you bridge that gap? And I think that's where you have to have this coming together of communities where you've got perhaps one trusted partner who you built the knowledge in, and you trust them to make the evaluation on your behalf. And I think if we start to be able to do that and have good conversations which understand the technology to build that trust, and then you have the confidence to have that harmonization, reciprocity. I think that's where it comes from, and I think needs to be government facilitation to create that enabling environment for that to happen. And I think there's a lot of knowledge sitting with some regulators, so if we can share that knowledge more, then it helps to support that process.
Wonderful. So trust across regulatory agencies, I suppose, both in the regional and also in the global level. Thank you so much, Roma. All right. Well, thank you so much again to all of our presenters as well as the participants that's been with us today. I will give the floor now to my colleague from Rotterdam Convention, Mario Iarto, to close our time here together. Mario, please.
Thank you very much, Buyung, for facilitating this session. You did a great job. I also want to thank our excellent panelists for their very interesting presentations, and also for very quickly addressing the questions that were sent by many of the participants today. Just to close this webinar, I would like to again highlight what Mr. Shia mentioned in his opening words earlier today, that at the FAO we are very much aware of the great importance of the issue of biopesticides, and we have confirmed that during this session in which we have been joined by so many participants. We have heard also 2 very interesting questions, and I think that also confirms that there is a great interest in continue working and facilitating the discussion to go deeper into the registration, but also on other important aspects about biopesticides, including those that are involve technical and scientific evaluation. In that respect, I can share with you that at FAO we will continue organizing further sessions to exchange information about this topic, among others that are related to alternatives to hazardous pesticides. And of course, we will be doing that as much as possible in collaboration with experts from other agencies, national authorities, and the private sector that have nevertheless indicated their interest in working with us to share their experience in the different aspects on the uses and management of biopesticides. To close, I would like to thank again to all of you for joining us today, for taking your time to connect virtually. It's still amazing to see that we can join for the same event regardless of our geographical location and our time zone. And I think that it's another clear indication that we have a great interest in a common issue that is of importance and relevance globally. I wish you all a nice day and a good end of the year, but especially that this is a very healthy end of 2021, and of course a good start of next year also with plenty of health. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Bye.